Well, we're going to be talking about parenthood, parenting. And of course, to be a parent, you've got to have children. And here's the story of one such man. It's not his first child, it's probably his second or third. A man speaks frantically into the phone. My wife is pregnant and her contractions are only 2 minutes apart. The response is this her first child? The doctor queries. No, you idiot, this is her husband. I didn't want to be hard on the women today. So there you go. Two kids are talking to each other. One says, I'm really worried. My dad works 12 hours a day to give me a nice home and good food. My mom spends the whole day cleaning and cooking for me. I'm worried sick. The other kid looks at him and says, what have you got to worry about? Sounds to me like you've got it made. The first kid responds, but what if they try to escape? Right? Or this one. A young man agrees to babysit one night so that a single mom could have an evening out. At bedtime, he sends the youngsters upstairs to bed and settles himself down to watch football. One child kept creeping down the stairs, but the young man kept sending him back to bed. At 9 o'clock, a knock came on the door. It was the next door neighbor, Mrs. Brown, asking where her son was. If her son was there, and the young man brusquely replied, no. But just then, a little head appears over the banister and shouts, I'm here, Mom, but he won't let me go home. Yeah, like that, do you? Here you go. Now, this is for the moms. This is a lesson of learned knowledge. The first child eats dirt. What do? You call the doctor. This is first-time parent. Second child eats dirt. What do? You clean out their mouth. The third child eats dirt. The parents wonder if she really needs to feed them. Right? But then the best one is this one. Proverbs speaks to this. The first part anyways. Don't yell at your kids. Lean in real close and whisper. It's much more scarier. Right. Parenting. Great privilege, awesome responsibility. And I know probably some through the course of life may argue with me on that point. But it is a great privilege. It is an awesome responsibility. Proverbs 23, 25, 26 says, may your father and mother be glad. May she who gave you birth rejoice. My son, give me your heart and let your eyes keep to my ways. So this morning we're going to talk about just that, parenting. To begin with, I would like to be able to claim the fame of being a perfect parent. But as Doug spelled out this morning, I'm not the perfect husband either. Not even after 34 years. In fact, I've come to believe that there is no such thing as perfect kids nor perfect parents. We're all human and we're all prone to make mistakes, both children and parents alike. I have two wonderful kids, both serving the Lord. I am thankful beyond thankfulness that they have turned out pretty good, and I'm proud of them for the way they have grown, developed, and made a life for themselves. The book of Proverbs gives us some broad principles for parenting today, and it's those I want to share with you. The first point, parenting is a joy. Parenting is a privilege. The Bible says in Psalm 127, verse 3, children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from Him. There are probably times when you have wondered about that. Times when there seemed anything but a gift or a reward. But that's what they are. They are precious treasures and gifts that God has given to us, entrusting us to bring them up in care and nurture. Verse 25 says, may your father and mother be glad. May she who gave you birth rejoice. Now, I read about a young man who was leaving for college. As he placed his bags in the taxi that waited to take him to the train station, he paused for a moment and looked back at his aging parents who stood there as proud as they could possibly be. What they saw was a young man about to embark upon a promising field of study and career. What they were thinking was, how were they going to renovate his room? No, that's a different story. What they saw was a young man about to embark on a promising field of study and career. They had prepared him well emotionally, socially, spiritually, and had worked and sacrificed to give him a good home and put him through school. As he looked back, he saw loving parents who had sacrificed many of their own wants and needs to be good parents for him. And he was moved. He said, "Mom, Dad, what can I ever do to thank you for all you have done for me?" They said, "You can't repay us and we don't expect you to. That's not the way it works. The best reward you can give us is to go out, be successful, and make something of yourself." You see, it is a privilege to be a parent, but it comes with an awesome responsibility. Parenting is a high and holy task, and we should never discount or demean it. Some people, for some strange reason, put down the importance of being good parents. Some look at child rearing and parenting as a second-rate position in our society, and that's a shame. A university professor didn't want to go to a very sophisticated academic gathering at the University of Pennsylvania a few years back, but he had to attend. He was quite uncomfortable with some of the conversation when a woman colleague who taught sociology struck up a conversation with he and his wife. And at one point, the woman turned to his wife in a demeaning manner and said this, "And what is it that you do, my dear?" Can just hear. I love the answer his wife gave. I am socializing two Homo sapiens into the dominant values of the Judeo-Christian tradition in order that they might be the instruments for the transformation of the social order into the kind of eschatological utopia that God willed from the beginning of creation. And then she looks at this woman and says, "And what is it that you do?" And the woman professor, with her head down, answered humbly, I teach sociology." Demeaning is not what you do when it comes to parenting. We need to recognize that parenting is a joy and a privilege. Parenting, secondly, requires love and boundaries. You have heard people point to Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24, and paraphrase the verse this way: "Spare the rod, ruin the child." You know that verse, don't you? Frankly, I've always been wary of people who say that sort of thing to justify spanking or beating on their children. There are a lot of people who are walking around today carrying the emotional and physical wounds from a parent who was overzealous and sometimes downright cruel to them when they were young. Adults, rather than setting the proper example for their children and loving them the way Christ loves us, have abused their children emotionally and physically and need to make amends. You and I need to realize just how strongly Jesus Christ is going to react to this kind of inappropriate behavior and misdirected parenting. He said in Matthew chapter 8, verse 6, Peterson's translation, The Message, "If you give them a hard time, bullying or taking advantage of their simple trust, you'll soon wish you hadn't. You'd be better off dropped in the middle of the lake with a millstone around your neck." Pretty harsh, pretty strong. The message: you take advantage of one of these precious treasures God has entrusted to you, and you're going to be in big trouble. Be very careful. Be very careful how you impact the life of a young person. Be very careful, for it is a sacred trust and awesome responsibility. And God is going to hold you even more accountable than the Children's Aid Society. While the Bible does give us the right as parents to spank when necessary, it must be measured and reserved as the very last resort. And if you can't do it in love, then you are simply not qualified to do it in the first place. I remember well the time as a child. I was about 8 years old when my mother found out and caught me stealing. On top of it all, I lied about it, and if there was one thing my mother hated, it was lying. She was small, but she could be mighty. As she took me home from my grandparents' place, I had a good idea what was in store for me. When she got me home, she took one of those wooden lathes and, well, let me say, she administered some very popular and unpopular discipline, depending on your point of view, or on my prospect, more so on my posterior. Let me say to you, regardless of how you feel about spanking, it did work. I've never stole anything again, except my wife's love. Thank you. That's worth a trophy, Doug. I never stole anything again. The spanking or the tears of disappointment in my mother's eyes were a lesson learned. From my observation, the pendulum has swung too far in the opposite direction, however, these days. Most parents are so lenient and soft on discipline that their children are growing up without any direction, without any instruction, without any guidance in the basic stuff of life like honesty, integrity, compassion, faithfulness, and manners. The key is balance, love, and discipline. Love and the setting of boundaries. So if you love your kids, you'll set boundaries for their behavior and deportment in life. Proverbs 23 verses 13 and 14 from the Message says, "Don't be afraid to correct your young ones. A spanking won't kill them. A good spanking, in fact, might save them from something worse than death." Proverbs also says that if you fail to provide the necessary discipline for life and living to your children, it is a sign that you just don't care. You don't really love them. So, Proverbs 13:24. If you refuse to discipline your children, it proves you don't love them. If you love your children, you will be prompt to discipline them. Our children, your children, are counting on us, believe it or not, even if they don't know it yet, to set directions and boundaries for their lives, no matter what their age, leading up to adulthood. It is a sacred trust and an awesome responsibility. Proverbs 22 verse 15 says, "Young people are prone to foolishness and fads. The cure comes through tough-minded discipline." Your kids may think you are old-fashioned, out of date, mine do, and behind the times, but they'll come around. They do. It's amazing how one's perspective changes with a little experience in life. Parenting is a joy and awesome privilege. Parenting requires love and boundaries, and parenting requires example and modeling. Proverbs 22 verse 6, "Point your kids in the right direction, and when they're old, they won't be lost." How many times have we had the conversation, or have you had the conversation with family members really concerned about the way your teenagers have turned out, or the choices that they are making? We've all been there. We all go through that. But let it be known also that when they get to the stage of starting a family together, 9 times out of 10, they usually turn back to what they were taught. They turn back to it because they know it was solid teaching. They know it was good grounding, and they want their young one to experience what they themselves had learned from their parents. So don't be hard on yourself, but do lead by example and by modeling. Point your kids in the right directions, and when they are old, they will turn back to it. If you look carefully at what Jesus taught and how he taught it during his time on earth, you'll notice that his discipling method was modeling rather than indoctrination. He taught by example more than he taught by words. That's why he took the basin and the towel and washed the disciples' feet. That's why he reached out and restored the soldier's ear when one of his disciples sliced it off in a bout of anger. That's why he wept bitterly over the sins of Jerusalem. Let me say, the same thing applies to parenting. The most successful parenting comes when you and I show by example how to live life well and live it right. It has to be seen in action before it can be put into action. Over and over and over again in the book of Proverbs, sons and daughters are called to heed the instruction of their parents. Listen to the knowledge of their mothers and fathers. Accept the discipline applied for correction and follow in the path set for them. The question, however, is this: what are we teaching our children? What are our kids picking up from our life and way of living? Proverbs 1 verse 8 says, "Listen, my son, listen to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." I picked up this story some years ago. It's a progression in life. Listen. At 14 years of age, Junior noticed his father grinning when he came home from the office. "Got a ticket for speeding, but Jake down at City Hall got the ticket fixed for me," he said. At 15 years, Junior was with his mother when she backed the car into a tree. The damage was excessive, so she said, We'll say someone ran into us when we were parked downtown. That way we'll collect the insurance for it all." At 16 years, he listened to his grandfather reminiscing about the good old days when he made $100,000 in the black market of selling cars. At 17 years old, Uncle John was bragging that on a good share of his business, he got paid cash, gave no receipts, and avoided having to pay tax. Just cash. "Why be a sucker and let the government get all my money?" he said. At 18 years, Junior and his family pulled every string possible to get him a scholarship at a coveted university. They even lied about their family income to make it seem like their son needed financial aid. Now, when he was experiencing a rough time scholastically, he took some of his money to pay another student to sell him the answers to an upcoming exam. But Junior was caught, and as a result of the adventure, he was expelled from this university. And when he returned home in disgrace, his mother, humiliated by the incident, burst into hysteria, saying, "How could you have done this to us?" She sobbed hysterically, "That isn't the way we raised you." And that was taken from story entitled Down to Earth by John Lawrenson. You know, friends, We do a lot to build a home, don't we? Or we think it takes a lot to build a home. And yet, 50 years from now, it won't matter what kind of car we drove. It won't matter what kind of house we lived in. It won't matter how much we had or didn't have in our bank accounts. It won't matter much about what your clothes looked like. But one thing that will matter is this. The world may be a little bit better because you were important in the life of your child. If you want to pass on the secret of living life well and living it right to your children, you need to balance love and the setting of boundaries. You need to set the example for your children by modeling the example of Jesus Christ in life. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to Thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow with ceaseless praise. The disclaimer was made, I am not the perfect parent, but I do know that when Jesus Christ is first place in our households, it makes a substantial difference to how we raise our children and what our children learn and what they eventually become. My challenge to you this morning is that as a parent, if you could do better, now is the time to begin. Now is the time to recognize the example that Jesus Christ has made for us and follow Him.